She walked through the courtyard with her shoulders slightly hunched, the weight of eyes on her pressing down like a physical force. The chain around her neck glinted under the weak morning sun, the metallic dog tags catching tiny flashes of light with each step she took. Each clink of metal seemed to echo in her mind, reminding her and everyone else that she was different, that she carried a mark of experience most of them could never understand. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol, a signifier of something greater, something beyond the petty chatter of schoolyard politics and casual cruelty. Yet, to the people who didn't know her story, it was an invitation to ridicule, a target for their ignorance and fear. From the moment she entered, whispers began to ripple through the courtyard. They started softly at first, almost as if the bullies were testing the waters. Murmurs carried between friends and partners in crime. "Look at her," someone muttered, barely audible, though enough to ensure the words found their way to her ears. "Why does she even wear that?" Another voice followed, more biting, sharper in tone. "Think she's trying to look tough? She's ridiculous." The words were small, but they were like drops on stone, relentless, each one chipping away at the fragile armor of composure she had spent years cultivating. She didn't turn around. She didn't engage. She had learned long ago that confrontation in this arena usually rewarded the aggressor. The courtyard had its own rules, unspoken but clearly understood, where strength was measured by the ability to dominate, intimidate, or humiliate others. And in this ecosystem, she was an anomaly. She carried her past openly around her neck, a tangible relic of something the others could not even begin to comprehend. They only saw it as a prop, a costume she had chosen to wear carelessly, and in their eyes, anything different was fair game. Every step she took was deliberate, measured, calculated. She could feel the gazes pressing into her back, weighing on her as though invisible hands were pushing her forward while trying to drag her down at the same time. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence in the way she walked that almost mimicked defiance. Her mind, however, was far from the simple notion of retaliation or anger. It was occupied with maintaining equilibrium, keeping the storm of emotions beneath a surface that could appear calm to the casual observer. She had long ago discovered that survival in this social battlefield depended on control, on turning inward to armor herself against the ridicule that was coming. Nearby, clusters of students leaned against walls or perched on benches, all eyes subtly, or not so subtly, following her movements. They whispered and snickered, their voices rising and falling like a tide that threatened to swallow her whole. Each giggle was a strike, each comment a subtle jab at her identity, yet she carried on. Dog tags were not common in this environment, and those who wore them often had histories and stories they couldn't even begin to share without being misunderstood. She knew the weight of the judgment, the misinterpretations, the assumptions. Most of these kids had no idea that dog tags represented service, sacrifice, perhaps loss, and resilience, concepts foreign to their insulated lives. To them, it was just a shiny object dangling on a chain, something to mock, something to brand her with ridicule. Her mind wandered briefly as she walked, tracing memories of the first time she had put them on. It had been a quiet morning at home, the sun filtering through blinds, illuminating the small room filled with relics of a life spent in service, discipline, and duty. Those tags were more than metal. They were a connection to something she valued deeply, a reminder of who she was beyond the mockery and sneers. Now, as she moved through the open space of the courtyard, she carried that entire history with her, a silent testimony to experiences others could never imagine. And yet, in this moment, all that mattered to the onlookers was their own amusement, their own satisfaction at finding someone to belittle, someone to make small in order to feel large. A few of the more daring ones took steps forward, inching closer, their smirks widening, eyes glinting with mischief. It was subtle, predatory even, the kind of behavior that had been rehearsed countless times in previous encounters. They didn't even need to speak yet. The posture, the proximity, the casual confidence in their movements was enough to communicate disdain, an unspoken challenge to her composure. Every so often, A comment would slip out, low enough that most would miss it, but she would hear it, catch the sting. She thinks she's important. One said under his breath, nudging another, like she's better than us. Their ignorance was palpable, and their cruelty was sharpened by their lack of understanding, by the assumption that she could be dismissed with laughter and sneers. She slowed her pace, but only slightly, feeling the tension wrap around her like a physical presence. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, a subconscious gesture of reassurance, a connection to the identity she refused to let them strip away. The courtyard seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in as the whispers grew louder, turning into an almost tangible fog of judgment and mockery. Every movement she made, every step, every subtle shift of her gaze, was being analyzed, dissected, interpreted through the narrow lens of someone else's arrogance. And still, she moved forward, a quiet defiance in the face of a crowd that sought to reduce her to nothing more than a target of amusement. The bullies wasted no time. As soon as she stepped into the center of the courtyard, they began their performance, a calculated display of mockery designed to draw attention from everyone around. At first, it was subtle, a smirk exchanged here, a whisper there, the kind of small, insidious gestures that make their mark without anyone realizing it immediately. But it quickly escalated, growing bolder with each passing moment. One of them leaned casually against a wall, head tilted, voice dripping with faux concern as he asked, "Hey, are those real?" His tone was loaded, sarcastic, challenging, a thinly veiled attempt to make her flinch or respond. Another snickered behind him, elbowing a friend, eyes darting toward her to gauge the effect of their cruelty. The intention was clear, to humiliate her, to strip her of composure in front of everyone watching. Her heart rate picked up slightly, but she refused to show it. She had learned over time that reactions were the fuel for their fire. Bullies thrived on responses, feeding off the smallest flicker of emotion that betrayed fear, irritation, or uncertainty. They seemed to move in unison, a choreographed dance of ridicule that had been rehearsed in countless previous encounters with others who dared to stand apart from the crowd. Each word, each movement, each pointed glance was a weapon in their arsenal, and she was their chosen target for the day. They didn't need a reason beyond difference itself. She was enough, her individuality, her courage to wear the dog tags, her quiet dignity, all providing perfect fodder for their mockery. They circled her subtly at first, each step calculated to invade her space without overtly breaking the unspoken rules of confrontation. Their shadows stretched across the pavement like a warning, and she could feel the heat of their presence, a pressure that tried to push her off balance without a single word being spoken. The leader of the group, a tall boy with a grin that never seemed to reach his eyes, leaned slightly forward, his words laced with ridicule and judgment. "Those things around your neck, they don't make you special," he said, voice just loud enough to carry to the nearby students. "You think anyone cares about what they mean? You're just pathetic." The others laughed, a ripple of cruel amusement, and it was clear that the purpose was not just to mock her, but to entertain themselves and impress each other with their dominance. Some of the other onlookers tried to avert their eyes, unsure whether to intervene or simply remain spectators. A few exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension but hesitant to step in, caught in that universal fear of social repercussions. The bullies sensed this hesitation and drew confidence from it, feeling the power that came from controlling the atmosphere, manipulating the crowd, bending it subtly to their will. They thrived on this dynamic, where even the absence of intervention was proof of their influence. Each whisper, each snide remark, each mocking glance reinforced the invisible hierarchy they had created, a temporary kingdom built on intimidation and fear, and she was standing at the center of it. Their voices grew louder, bolder, more theatrical. They made exaggerated gestures, pointed at her dog tags, laughed as if they had just told the funniest joke in the world, and jeered at her posture, the way she held herself, even the rhythm of her steps. "Look at her trying to act tough," one of them jeered. "It's just jewelry, girl. You're not special. You're just desperate." The words stung, precise and deliberate, aimed to erode her sense of self without needing to be physically violent. It was psychological warfare, a test to see if she could crumble under scrutiny and ridicule. Despite the intensity of the harassment, she remained composed outwardly, though inside, she was a storm of conflicting emotions, frustration, anger, but also a steely resolve. She knew that showing weakness was exactly what they wanted, and she refused to grant them that satisfaction. Her fingers brushed the dog tags briefly, a private act of reassurance, a silent reminder of the strength and history they represented. They did not understand the significance, nor would they ever, and that was exactly why their words could never truly touch her core. Still, the environment was toxic, the collective energy of mockery pressing down on her from all directions. The bullies' laughter and whispers collided with the murmurs of onlookers, creating a soundscape of judgment that made the courtyard feel smaller, heavier, almost suffocating. Each new comment was designed to provoke, to push her boundaries, to test whether she could withstand the scrutiny without faltering. Their creativity and cruelty was apparent. The way they layered sarcasm over humor, intimidation over innocence, crafting a complex web of social pressure aimed squarely at her. Yet, with every insult flung, every laugh directed at her, she silently counted the moments, measured the space, controlled her breathing, and kept moving forward, refusing to let their orchestrated humiliation derail her focus or shake her resolve. As the whispers and laughter continued to swirl around her, the tension in the courtyard grew almost tangible, like a storm hovering just above the ground, waiting for a spark. Everyone seemed to pause in anticipation, their attention fixed on the unfolding drama, their curiosity mingled with fear and excitement. The air itself felt heavier, charged with the energy of expectation, as if the courtyard had become a stage, and she was the unwilling lead in a performance none of them had scripted. Every movement she made was scrutinized, every blink noted, every subtle shift in posture interpreted as a sign of weakness or defiance. The intensity of the moment was suffocating, and yet she forced herself to remain steady, to maintain an exterior of calm in the face of mounting scrutiny. Around her, the crowd's energy fluctuated with the ebb and flow of the bully's antics. Each taunt, each sneer, each deliberate glance sparked reactions in the onlookers, a ripple effect that magnified the impact of the harassment. Some students leaned closer, craning their necks to catch every word, while others hesitated at the edges, caught between empathy and fear of becoming targets themselves. There was a strange collective tension, a shared understanding that something significant was happening, though no one could yet predict the outcome. It was as if the courtyard had become a pressure cooker, each whispered comment and each mocking gesture adding to the intensity, threatening to boil over at any moment. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the silent judgment pressing down like a physical force. Every glance seemed to carry 1,000 unspoken words, doubts, assumptions, ridicule, and disbelief. The bullies thrived on this silent communication, using it to amplify their control over the space. Their strategy was subtle but effective, a combination of overt mockery and the power of social influence. By drawing attention to her difference, they forced everyone else to participate, whether actively or passively, in the act of shaming. Even those who did not speak were implicated, their silence interpreted as consent, their hesitation read as weakness, and the courtyard collectively reinforced the hierarchy the bullies had established. Despite the pressure, she maintained a deliberate composure, a quiet resilience that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Her steps were measured, her gaze steady, and her breathing controlled, as if she were moving through a world far removed from the immediate hostility. Inwardly, she counted the seconds, calculated her responses, and reminded herself that the true measure of strength was not in confrontation but in endurance. Every taunt, every snicker, was an opportunity to reinforce her own sense of identity, to remain grounded in the values and experiences that the dog tags around her neck represented. They could try to break her, to make her flinch or falter, but they could not erase the history and significance that had shaped her into the person she was. The courtyard seemed to contract around her as the bullies leaned closer, their laughter growing louder, more exaggerated. One of them made a theatrical gesture, pointing at her dog tags as if they were a costume worn for amusement rather than a symbol of real-world experience and courage. Another mockingly mimicked her posture, exaggerating her every movement to provoke a reaction, while the others cheered him on, their amusement feeding the intensity of the harassment. The crowd watched, caught between fascination and discomfort, unsure of whether to intervene or remain passive observers. The social dynamics at play were complex, with power, fear, and curiosity intersecting in ways that made the situation almost unbearable, both for her and for anyone watching closely enough to feel the tension. She could feel her pulse quicken but did not allow it to show. The bullies sought a reaction, any indication of vulnerability, but she had learned to internalize her emotions, to shield her outward demeanor from their influence. Her fingers brushed the dog tags again, a subtle, almost imperceptible act of reassurance. Each movement was deliberate, a reminder of the strength and significance they carried. While the bullies relied on spectacle, she relied on quiet confidence, an invisible armor built from years of discipline, experience, and self-awareness. Her presence alone became a challenge to their assumptions, a silent assertion that they could not define her worth or her identity, no matter how loudly they tried. The tension in the air continued to rise, a complex interplay of expectation, fear, and anticipation. Every student in the courtyard became an unwitting participant, their reactions amplifying the stakes, turning a simple act of bullying into a high-stakes psychological theater. The bullies were emboldened by the attention, their confidence fueled by the unspoken acknowledgement that they held temporary power over the space and the social narrative unfolding within it. And yet, amid all this, she remained a constant, unwavering presence, a quiet counterbalance to the chaos that surrounded her. The sudden rumble of an engine broke through the cacophony of whispers and laughter, a low, commanding sound that seemed out of place in the ordinary courtyard. Heads turned instinctively toward the source, and in an instant, the energy shifted, as though someone had flipped an invisible switch. Conversations died mid-word, giggles halted abruptly, and even the bullies froze for a fraction of a second, their confident smirks faltering under the weight of uncertainty. The black SUV glided smoothly into view, its polished exterior catching glimmers of sunlight and reflecting the world around it with a quiet authority that demanded attention. It moved with a deliberate grace, as if every inch of its path had been calculated, every turn premeditated, its presence signaling something far beyond ordinary circumstance. The government plates on the front of the vehicle were unmistakable, metallic letters and numbers etched with precision, their significance undeniable. Even those who had never paid attention to such details recognized that this was not an ordinary car, that this was a symbol of authority, of power that extended far beyond the courtyard. The sheer sight of it caused murmurs to ripple through the crowd, a subtle mix of awe, fear, and curiosity. The bullies' bravado, once so dominant, wavered in the presence of something they could neither predict nor control. They had constructed a world in which they were the architects of fear, but this vehicle shattered that illusion, introducing a force entirely beyond their comprehension. She felt a flicker of relief, a quiet reassurance that the tide of the confrontation might be turning, though her senses remained alert. Every instinct honed through previous encounters warned her that this moment, like all moments of sudden change, carried its own risks. Yet, there was an undeniable shift in the air, a subtle realignment of power that she could feel through her very core. The SUV stopped smoothly at the edge of the courtyard, the engine now idling, low and controlled, a steady presence that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had preceded it. Its arrival was a signal, a prelude to intervention, though no one yet knew exactly what form it would take. The bullies, for their part, were visibly unsettled. The leader, tall and once so assured, now glanced at his friends, uncertainty flickering across his face. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a tension that crept into his posture, the casual dominance that had defined his approach now faltering. The others fidgeted, shifting weight from one foot to another, glancing at the SUV with hesitant curiosity and unspoken apprehension. They could sense authority, a real, tangible authority, and it unnerved them in a way that their previous tactics of intimidation had never been able to. The courtyard, once a stage for their orchestrated cruelty, now felt different, charged with the potential for consequences they had never imagined. Her own attention, while briefly drawn to the vehicle, remained centered. She observed the driver, the tinted windows reflecting the sunlight, obscuring the identity of the person inside. A sense of anticipation coiled within her, a mixture of curiosity and a quiet confidence that whatever was coming would tip the balance in ways the bullies could not anticipate. She adjusted the chain of her dog tags, a subtle grounding gesture, a reminder of the strength and identity she carried that had, until this moment, been subject to ridicule. The presence of the SUV did not diminish her agency, nor did it define her worth, but it introduced a new dynamic, a potential shift in the narrative that had played out around her for too long. The crowd watched in tense silence, the usual chatter replaced by a collective awareness of something significant unfolding. Students who had been leaning against walls or perched on benches now stood straighter, craning their necks to see better, sensing that the ordinary rules of the courtyard had been suspended. The bullies, once so commanding, found themselves uncertain, their strategies of social dominance suddenly inadequate. Every laugh, every whisper, every calculated gesture seemed to lose its power in the presence of a force they could neither predict nor manipulate. A subtle sense of awe mixed with apprehension settled over the scene. The vehicle itself, sleek, black, and imposing, became a focal point, an unspoken signal that someone with authority and intention had arrived. The bully's energy, previously charged with confidence and cruelty, now carried a tinge of fear and hesitation. They whispered to one another, voices low, as if trying to remind themselves that they were still in control, though deep down, they sensed that the equilibrium had shifted. The SUV, with its gleaming exterior and official plates, represented more than just transportation. It represented accountability, oversight, and the possibility of immediate consequences for the chaos they had unleashed. She remained calm, poised, aware that this was a turning point. Every instinct told her to remain grounded, to observe without overreacting, to let the situation unfold while keeping control of her own emotions. Her dog tags felt heavier now, a tangible reminder of resilience and identity, a symbol of who she was beyond the scrutiny and judgment of the courtyard. The black SUV was more than a vehicle. It was a herald of change, a disruption to the hierarchy that had dominated the space, and a promise that the narrative was about to be rewritten. The moment the black SUV came to a smooth stop, the atmosphere in the courtyard shifted entirely. There was a subtle change in the energy, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The bullies, once the uncontested center of attention, now seemed small and uncertain, their gestures hesitant, their laughter faltering. The vehicle exuded authority, and the presence of something so deliberate and imposing unsettled the hierarchy they had so carefully maintained. From inside the tinted windows, a figure emerged, moving with a deliberate, measured pace that carried with it a quiet command. Every step was purposeful, and each movement seemed to signal control over the environment in a way the bullies could neither predict nor counter. The air was thick with tension, the kind that prickled the skin and made hearts beat faster. The students around the courtyard instinctively took a step back, sensing the shift in dynamics. They watched as the figure approached, each step echoing slightly against the concrete, magnifying the significance of what was about to occur. The bullies tried to recover their composure, straightening their postures, forcing smiles that didn't reach their eyes, but their attempts at regaining dominance were futile. They could feel the presence of authority pressing in, subtle but undeniable, a force that rendered their usual strategies of intimidation ineffective. The power they had wielded so confidently moments ago now seemed fragile, almost laughable in the face of someone who carried real influence. The figure finally reached a position just a few feet from the girl, the impact of proximity immediate and electric. There was a sense of expectation, a collective holding of breath, as the surrounding students sensed the unfolding confrontation. Every subtle movement was charged with meaning: the tilt of a head, the lift of an eyebrow, the shift of weight from one foot to the other. In the midst of all this, the girl stood tall, grounded in her own strength, aware of the significance of the moment. She had weathered countless taunts and whispers, yet the arrival of this person introduced a new layer of complexity, a variable that could change everything. The bullies glanced at one another, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Their smirks had disappeared, replaced by tension and doubt. They were suddenly confronted with the possibility that their actions might carry consequences far beyond social embarrassment. The courtyard, once their domain of control, was no longer theirs to command. They felt the invisible hand of authority, one that could not be bargained with or intimidated, pressing down on them with quiet insistence. The air seemed to crackle with the collision of fear and anticipation, a palpable tension that wrapped around everyone present, making the mundane courtyard feel like the epicenter of a world-altering moment. From the crowd, whispers rose again, but this time they were different. They carried awe and a subtle fear, a recognition that something extraordinary was happening. The girl could sense the shift, the way the onlookers' eyes darted between the approaching authority and the bullies, the way the energy of judgment that had weighed so heavily on her now seemed to turn toward those who had wielded it so carelessly. It was a subtle inversion of power, a reminder that the dynamics of fear and dominance were never fixed, that authority and consequence could appear unexpectedly and realign the balance in an instant. The bullies' postures betrayed their growing unease. Small gestures, like a shift of weight from one foot to the other or a fleeting glance at a friend for reassurance, revealed cracks in their confidence. Their carefully constructed armor of arrogance was faltering, unable to withstand the presence of someone whose influence was both visible and implicit. Even without words being exchanged, the confrontation communicated volumes. It was a silent assertion of control, a demonstration that certain behaviors would no longer be tolerated, that the social rules they had relied on were being rewritten in real time. The girl remained composed, aware of her own presence amid the shifting dynamics. She understood that this was a moment of revelation, not only for the bullies but for the crowd as well. Her dog tags, once a target of ridicule, now seemed to carry additional weight, a tangible reminder of resilience and identity. Every step the authority figure took reinforced the notion that justice, in its most immediate and tangible form, was arriving. The courtyard had transformed from a stage of humiliation into a theater of accountability, and she was at the center of it. The tension continued to build as the bullies shifted nervously, their eyes flicking between the approaching figure and the girl they had tried to dominate. There was an unspoken understanding that the confrontation could escalate, that consequences were imminent, and that the power they had assumed was conditional, fragile, and subject to forces beyond their control. The energy in the courtyard had transformed entirely, from one of mockery and intimidation to one of anticipation and uncertainty. Every person present acutely aware that a significant moment of reckoning was unfolding in front of them. The moment reached a delicate balance, a point where tension, anticipation, and unspoken understanding coalesced in the courtyard. The girl, standing upright and composed, became the focal point of every gaze, every whispered word, every flutter of curiosity that rippled through the crowd. Her dog tags, once ridiculed and misunderstood, now seemed to carry an almost magnetic significance, drawing the attention of everyone around her. They glimmered subtly in the sunlight, catching the eye, and in that reflection lay more than metal. They reflected her resilience, her history, and the quiet strength that had carried her through countless moments of judgment and ridicule. For the first time in that space, the narrative had shifted. She was no longer simply a target. She was a figure of quiet authority, an embodiment of endurance and determination. Around her, the crowd sensed the transformation, though few could articulate why. The bullies, once so sure of their dominance, were now unsettled, unsure of how to reclaim control in the face of something they could not manipulate. Their whispered insults and sneers had lost their sting, replaced by a tension that mirrored their internal unease. They were forced to confront the realization that their carefully constructed hierarchy had limits, and that consequences were arriving in ways they had never anticipated. The black SUV, the figure of authority that had stepped from it, and the girl herself together created a dynamic that challenged assumptions, disrupted routines, and demanded a reassessment of power within the courtyard. The figure from the SUV approached deliberately, each step measured, precise, and authoritative. Every movement seemed to communicate control without the need for words, a silent declaration that the current state of affairs could not continue unchecked. The presence of someone whose authority was unquestionable amplified the girl's own quiet power. She had endured countless challenges, faced ridicule without retaliating, and navigated hostility with a composure that had often been misunderstood. Now, in the presence of this figure, the weight of her experience became palpable, visible not only in her posture, but in the way she held herself, unflinching in the face of scrutiny. The bullies shifted nervously, their confidence waning with every step of the approaching authority. One of them attempted a forced grin, a feeble attempt to regain some semblance of control, but it fell flat against the unspoken judgment radiating from the figure. They whispered among themselves, tiny murmurs of uncertainty and confusion, realizing that their influence over the courtyard was evaporating in real time. Their tactics, which had relied on intimidation and spectacle, were ineffective against the combination of genuine authority and personal resilience they now faced. Every glance toward the girl revealed a flicker of recognition, a dawning comprehension that the person they had ridiculed was not only unbroken, but fundamentally untouchable by their petty cruelty. The crowd watched in rapt attention, the usual background noise of casual chatter replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation. Every student present sensed the shift in energy, the subtle redistribution of power. They understood instinctively that the moment was significant, that the balance of dominance had changed, and that witnessing this event was to observe an extraordinary display of consequence, authority, and integrity. Even those who had been indifferent or hesitant before now leaned in slightly, caught in the gravity of the unfolding scene. The courtyard, once a space of ordinary interaction, had been transformed into a theater of recognition and accountability. The girl's composure remained impeccable, her gaze steady, her posture unwavering. She did not need to speak, for her presence alone communicated strength. Her dog tags, resting against her chest, were more than an accessory. They were a statement, a symbol of identity that no amount of ridicule could diminish. She had endured the scrutiny, the whispers, the mockery, and had emerged not diminished but defined by her experience. Now, standing at the center of the courtyard, she was a testament to the power of resilience, a quiet reminder that true strength was not measured by the ability to intimidate, but by the ability to withstand, endure, and remain steadfast in one's own truth. The bullies' unease deepened as they realized that the narrative had irrevocably shifted. Their power, based on fear and social manipulation, was no longer effective. Every gesture, every movement, every attempt at defiance was met with a presence that could not be undermined, a weight of authority and principle that rendered them impotent. Even the students who had once been passive observers felt the gravity of the moment, recognizing that they were witnessing not just the confrontation of cruelty, but the assertion of something far more significant, the triumph of courage, resilience, and quiet dignity over ridicule and intimidation. Time seemed to stretch as the courtyard held its collective breath. The energy in the space had transformed entirely. What had begun as a scene of mockery and bullying was now a tableau of resilience, authority, and revelation. Every eye was on the girl, Every whisper turned inward as students reflected on what they were witnessing, and the bullies themselves confronted the unsettling reality that they had underestimated her, underestimated the power of integrity, and underestimated the unexpected forces that had arrived to restore balance in the courtyard.